Weaponising Science, Malaysia's LGBTQ Research. Written by Samantha Che. Published 23rd July 2018. Read by Gafar. In 2008, Sexuality Merdeka, a sexual rights festival, was held in Kuala Lumpur. Frequently cited as the first major piece of activism for sexual rights in conservative Malaysia, the event boldly proclaimed, "If one of us ain't free, none of us are." Although celebrated as a landmark moment for LGBTQ activism, the festival also marked the moment the government attitude towards LGBTQ issues took a turn for the worse. In 2011, the festival, which featured talks, workshops, and performances by activists, was banned by the police for inciting public disorder. Since then, the relationship between the state and the LGBTQ community has continued to be fraught. In recent years, homophobic attitudes have also sought the cover of academia and scholarly research in Malaysia. It's important for us to acknowledge that LGBT bodies have always been medicalized, always been framed in some medical way. We are mentally ill, we need surgery, says Tilaga Sulatire, prominent LGBTQ activist working with the pro-trans NGO Justice for Sisters. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer LGBTQ communities have long been treated as a serious public health issue by Malaysia's public authorities. In 2017, the Ministry of Health organized a video contest encouraging people to submit videos on topics such as gender dysphoria and ways LGBTQ individuals can prevent, control, and seek help, implying that being queer was something undesirable that required treatment. The contest, worded in a way that framed sexual orientations and identities as public health concerns, incited huge public backlash. Despite the outcry, Sulatire believes that there still are concerted and organized efforts by both state-backed and independent organizations to stigmatize the LGBTQ community, portraying them as victims of mental illness and disease. There is a lot of panic about the global conversation around LGBTQ people, she says. There is definitely a shift in people discussing gender and sexuality, and many countries have changed their policies and legislation so that there is better enjoyment of human rights for LGBTQ people, which I think is creating some panic and pushback around LGBTQ people. Religious conservatives often draw connections between being LGBTQ and suffering from some form of illness or disease. A forum organized by the Naratif Club of the International Islamic University Malaysia referred to the existence of queerness as the chronic cancer of society, while the state's own religious authorities consider gay or transgender people as having abnormal instincts. The Ma'ruf Club's forum was relatively small, but Islamic authorities in Malaysia have become extremely influential in recent years, in large part thanks to the politicization of religion by political elites. Religion has been used by the former Barisan Nasional government as a tool to delegitimize its multi-ethnic political rivals and clamp down on rising dissent. In the 2018 budget, it was revealed that 1.03 billion Malaysian ringgit, $252 million had been allocated for Islamic development, with the lion's share going to the controversial Islamic Development Department, JAKIM. Although homosexuality was officially removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, published by the American Psychiatric Association in the 1970s, it's still common in Malaysia and the wider Southeast Asia to encounter the belief that anything falling outside the cisgendered heterosexual norm is a form of mental illness. It's a way for authorities to consolidate power, which definitely has an Islamic dimension, says Dr. Alicia Izzaruddin, a gender studies scholar from University Malaya. People who are in between, those who are progressive or those who claim that this isn't true Islam, I'm just worried that these voices disappear and get shouted down because those on the polarizing ends are getting louder. In 2016, it emerged that JAKIM, a federal office tasked with governing the implementation of Islam in public life, had been collaborating with the government, particularly the Ministry of Health, MOH, to produce an action plan to address LGBTQ individuals, building on the work of existing committees who focus on treatment and rehabilitation plans for LGBTQ people. The Ministry of Health works very closely with JAKIM, says V, a trans woman and community organizer based in Selangor. We have a module called HIV in Islam, targeted at key populations, but it is very repentance focused. While the MOH program does provide testing and condoms, that particular module is all about how these key populations are sinful. Instead of working to address issues such as poverty or a lack of public information, which have been shown to have an impact on HIV transmission, authorities are actively focusing their resources and attention on criminalizing key populations. What we are seeing is that sexual transmission of HIV is high. So what is the government's response? Is it right to say that all LGBTQ people should be corrected? That approach is not only misguided, it increases harm to those people, says V. Some of Jakim's programs have been compared to conversion therapies used by Christian evangelicals in the United States. The most well-known is the Mukhayam program, which was designed as a form of outreach to the transgender community. Sulatire notes that these conversion programs commonly use a very passive-aggressive approach, using love and compassion in a toxic way with a community that already faces a lack of acceptance. V relates how Mukhayam organizers never directly urge participants to conform to their assigned at birth gender, but instead relying on gaslighting tactics to psycho your mind. It's bit by bit. They will say, "Oh, your hair is so nice, it's long, but why don't you cut it shorter to your shoulder? You will look so good with shorter hair. You still look pretty." Their approach is not harsh, but we were so naive, she says. The Mukhayam program, whose format has now been replicated by other religious groups, such as state religious councils, is an indication of the religious community's position on LGBTQ issues, that homosexuality or transgenderism is a personal choice or a mental defect, and those afflicted must balik ke pangkal jalan, return to the path. Following the wide influence of Jakim's tactics, a cohort of scientists, researchers, and ostensible scholars are now bringing anti-LGBTQ discourse and rhetoric into the realm of science and academic research, causing a subtle but notable shift in public discourse. In late March 2018, University Science Malaysia's USM Alumni Club organized a forum entitled Back to the Fitra, Menyantuni LGBT Kembali ke Jalan Allah, which loosely translates into Back to Human Nature, returning LGBT people to God's path. The forum sparked protests from pro-LGBTQ groups. A coalition of LGBTQ advocacy groups, including Justice for Sisters, Pelangi, Sisters in Islam, and Women's Aid Organization, released a press statement in response. Despite claims of menyantuni, or politely approaching LGBTQ persons, many documented cases have shown that such attempts resulted in an invasion of privacy, increase of lack of personal security and safety, increase of targeting and harassment of persons based on gender expression and actual or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity, increase of isolation, all of which can have severe long-term impact on the student's academic performance, health, and well-being. Tensions were further heightened after University Science Islam Malaysia, USIM, announced the establishment of an LGBTQ research academy to study the LGBTQ community through the lens of medical and scientific research. The academy is small, currently consisting of 5 individuals, and is led by Dr. Rafida Hanim Mokhtar, whose actual area of medical expertise is in cardiovascular biology. Dr. Rafida's lack of concrete experience in sexuality or gender research, while worrying, is simply par for the course in Malaysia, where many academics commenting on LGBTQ issues tend to lack the relevant credentials. For example, Dr. Ahmad Jailani, invited to represent the academic point of view at the Back to the Fitra event, has a PhD in Islamic finance. The Research Academy is governed by USIM's World Fatwa Management and Research Institute, INFAD, formed as a research and consultation institution and information center on fatwa. Academy Director Dr. Irwan Muhammad Subri tells New Naratif. INFAD has close ties with Jakim, and various state-backed Islamic scholars are muftis. Although these people have no authority to issue fatwas, a non-binding but authoritative pronouncement on Islamic law, they are regularly consulted in relation to such decisions. Both Dr. Irwan and Dr. Rafida say that Islamic tenets could bring real benefits to scientific research, especially in issues of public health and medicine. It is very important for Islamic scholars today to do field or academic research rather than referring to traditional textbooks, Dr. Irwan says. Islamic scholars today have to contribute to new things, but still within an Islamic or Sharia framework and in line with general Islamic principles. Dr. Rafida points to Western publications on issues of science and religion, such as the Journal of Religion and Health and Zygon, Journal of Religion and Science. But the Academy's work also follows a long-established practice in Malaysia of religion exerting influence over public health policies and studies. For instance, the Health Ministry turned to the National Fatwa Committee in 2009 to adjudicate on issues around female genital mutilation, FGM, despite opposition to the practice by the World Health Organization, which classifies the practice as having no medical benefits. Dr. Rafida says that her goal is to integrate religion in a way that is acceptable to the scientific community, but also states that there are no-go zones in which science cannot inquire, such as Aqidah, belief in God. Dr. Rafida's Research Academy forms only a part of INFAT's research, but stands at the center of the debate between religious parties and pro-LGBT groups. Dr. Rafida herself seems an odd choice to lead the Academy. A medical practitioner by training, her focus area up until around 2015 was cardiovascular physiology. She explains that her close relationships with colleagues at USIM were a major influence in her interest in the underlying factors which lead to the embrace of this lifestyle. For the first time, I was able to see health issues from a social perspective, and the university gave me a platform for that, she tells New Naratif. It was also partly a public interest issue, and I've always been curious to learn about the phenomenon of LGBTQ people. Dr. Rafida's characterization of being queer as a phenomenon and a lifestyle is a common refrain often heard amongst anti-LGBTQ groups in Malaysia and beyond. Such framing has been criticized for delegitimizing queer identities, implying that they are reversible choices. International study suggests otherwise. Despite years of research, scientists have been unable to conclude that sexual orientation is determined by any particular factor or factors, says the American Psychological Association. The group adds that most people experience little or no sense of choice about their sexual orientation. To date, Rafida and her 5-person team have only published one article related to healthcare for LGBTQ people, a 2017 paper entitled Addressing Muslim Transgenders' Health Issues Using Religious Approach in the Malaysian Setting, published in Advanced Science Letters, based on a 2-year research project that assessed Jakim's religious approach, essentially the Mukhayam program. We studied their knowledge, attitude, and practice before they embarked on the classes and the 3-day Mukhayam, or Ibadat, behavior camp, she says. My study covers those transgenders who have already started religious classes, including reading the Quran and prayers. Our study assesses the before and after effect of the programs. Dr. Rafida explains that the central question of her research was an inquiry into whether the religious approach would be able to tackle health issues in LGBTQ communities through the prevention of high-risk behavior, such as having multiple sexual partners and drug taking, activities often associated with the LGBT community. It's just the same as we approach a normal person to embrace religion so as to change their lifestyle, in the same way that we seek to correct other bad habits like smoking, she says. The peer-reviewed paper concludes that transgender individuals suffer from medical issues such as HIV and debilitating mental health conditions, and that Islamic preachings could have a major impact in reducing its risk factors. There is little in the way of recommendations and actionable solutions, but the paper does include a brief rundown of integration programs gleaned from Jakim's Mukhayam structure. The emergence of research, like Dr. Rafida's, signals a shift in tactics on the part of conservative groups, where higher education institutes are used to legitimize their efforts. Since publishing her paper, Dr. Rafida has made the rounds in local media, penning op-eds that arouse anger or support, and using her scientific and academic backgrounds to position herself as an authority on the subject. One such piece, entitled The Regressive Left, Human Rights Extortionists, and co-written with Azriel Muhammad Amin, implied that gay rights activists and left-wingers were fascists and argued that homosexuality is a chosen behavior that should be subject to laws that regulate public behavior. In another piece entitled "No Room for Secular Malaysia," she stated that the accorded human rights to gays, bisexuals, and transgenders not to be discriminated against, abused, or harmed should not be mixed with our duties and obligations to ensure that the health of the population is taken care of, going on to point out that men who have sex with men and transgender individuals are among the populations most affected by HIV/AIDS in Malaysia. In doing so, Dr. Rafida brings attitudes that have often been dismissed as quaint rural ignorance into the authoritative spaces of academia. Dr. Rafida is using her background in medicine as a legitimizer of her research, as well as her statements about LGBTQ people. Dr. Izzaruddin says, such output isn't linked to USIM's LGBTQ Research Academy. In February 2018, an article in a prominent Malay daily featured a list of ciri-ciri LGBTQ characteristics, written by the prominent evangelical Muslim Hanafiya Abdul Malik as a series of markers to identify and study LGBTQ people. He also provided a guide for identifying dominant genitalia for intersex people. According to Sulatire, such arguments aren't just based on bad science that ignores globally accepted standards. They're actively harmful because they perpetuate a mindset that views non-binary and sexually diverse bodies as being in need of medical intervention. Sex-normalizing surgeries create more trauma for people, and they are embedded in a very patriarchal ideation that our bodies must be either a male or female cisgender body, she says, referring to the surgical medical interventions for intersex individuals. Yet, the establishment continues to endorse and legitimize such attitudes, using the veneer of respectability accorded by scholars and academia to further influence mainstream mindsets. The result of the 9 May general election has given progressive advocacy groups cause to hope for reforms to counteract the regressive policies of the last few years. But while Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad and his cabinet have made significant commitments to review and perhaps even abolish oppressive laws like the Peaceful Assembly Act, the Anti-Fake News Act, and the mandatory death penalty, there is unlikely to be significant movement in the realm of LGBTQ rights. The new government has so far declined to clarify what lies ahead for JAKIM, and also all the other organizations under its umbrella. Mahathir has said that the organization will come under review, but those hoping for extensive reform will likely be disappointed. After all, an Islamist party is still a significant member of the new ruling coalition. Homophobia is also still alive and well in the new Malaysia. When Numan Afifif Sadam began working as the interim press officer for Syed Saddiq, Minister for Youth and Sports, it sparked a fierce backlash, with detractors insisting that a champion of LGBTQ causes couldn't serve as a government officer. Numan has since quit as press officer. Trust me, we have never felt that any government of Malaysia has ever been encouraging for LGBTQ people here, says Pang Ki Tek, a prominent LGBT activist, in a widely disseminated social media post debunking claims that a Gabungan gay coalition was protesting outside Syed's offices. Pang speculated that the false claim might have been an attempt by anti-Pakatan Harapan parties to make it appear that the government is encouraging LGBT people to be bolder. However, many still see the new government as its best chance for change. Members of parliament, such as Charles Santiago and Lim Yi Wei, have spoken up for LGBTQ rights, giving voice to a community that has long lacked champions in the House. Meanwhile, Malaysian LGBTQ allies and advocates continue to push on. As long as they are around, there will always be voices to counter homophobia presented as science.